Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief. We normally do this on Friday, but we had to shift because of breaking news yesterday, some of which we're going to discuss a little bit today. But what we always do here, we try to do every week, is to kind of give you an update of things that happened during the week, because I know that everybody can't watch every show that we do, but you do want to get some of the main points. So we kind of broke down some of the things that you really need to know during the week. And then we always add some new things so that you are on the top of your intel game and you know what's going on. First, the one we're going to start off with was a rare dispute we had. We had Doug McGregor on at the beginning of the week, and we cut in a piece from John Mearsheimer, another friend of the show, to make a point about something. We got Doug's comment on it. We had an unusual situation where Doug said, "Well, I don't completely agree with that, but hey, we like to show all sides of things." So here it was.
The problem here is the threat of escalation. You're now talking about hitting the Russian homeland. You're not talking about hitting Russian targets in territory that used to be part of Ukraine that Russia has now annexed. You're back to attacking Mother Russia. And the Russians have made it clear that they consider this to be a red line. Now, my view is these attacks are not likely to be very successful, and therefore the Russians will not retaliate in any meaningful way. I think, however, if I'm wrong, and their S-400s can't shoot down these missiles and they begin to have a real effect, that the Russians will retaliate in a serious way. And of course, the great danger is that the West, and here we're talking mainly about the United States, will get dragged into the war, and you'll have a great power war.
I disagree with John Mearsheimer, and I rarely do. The one thing that I disagree with here is he talked about we would be dragged into a war. Wrong, John. We've been dragging Europe into this war from day one. The Europeans now have second thoughts. They're scared. And in fact, behind this facade of solidarity, things are falling apart. Why do you think Schultz spoke and said what he did? Everybody else in Europe nodded their heads. No, we are not invading Russia. It's not going to happen. We're the ones that continue to provoke. We're the ones that are continuing to maintain, with British help, this corrupt puppet regime in Kiev, whose only mission in life is to either sacrifice as many Ukrainians as possible and to do as much damage as they can to Russia. And frankly, they haven't done much damage at all. You know, today it was announced that Russia has officially become, I think, the 5th largest economy in the world after Japan. Gosh, what a huge achievement for the Biden administration and his friends and stupid supporters in both parties sitting in Congress. They've made Russia a superpower again.
You know, honestly, it's not to where I think one is right or one is wrong. It's that I think that both of them they're looking at one side of the same coin. So they're both sides, both of the comments that you saw from both John and from Doug are accurate. And that's why I actually found it a little odd that Doug said he disagreed with him, because even when he's describing what he said, they're both looking at the same thing. Whether we are being dragged into a war or whether our actions are spawning the conditions that lead to a war, either way, it's the net is the same thing, is that we are sitting there in the potential for being fighting in a war that does not need to escalate. And some of the bigger issues that were involved with that is that we are taking risks that have no possibility of upside. When we are allowing Ukraine to use our weapons to strike into Russia, it doesn't give Ukraine any advantage. It doesn't help them tactically. It's not going to help them win the war. It's not even going to help them reverse course and start going back on the offensive. All it's going to do is anger the Russians and increase the risk that Putin makes good on his threat just days later, where he said, if you're going to use your weapons harming our enemy to strike our territory, then there's no reason why we can't do the same thing to your enemies, America, Great Britain, and the West. And so he has already threatened to send his weapons to our enemies, maybe in the Middle East, maybe in Africa, maybe even on our continent, who can say. And if these strikes get bad enough, and I think John was right, and he says that right now Putin is a cold calculator. And if he calculates that acting in an emotional way is going to be more harm for his country than good, then he's not going to take it. But if it's the case to where his air defense systems don't knock down some of these long-range missiles that may come in, and they do strike some critical infrastructure or personnel or something, and there's a big hit, then I think the chances of Putin acting on that and striking U.S. or Western assets elsewhere in the world is uncomfortably high. And listen, we don't even know. And John was also right in that we don't know where Putin's red lines are. We don't know what he really will say, but that this is far enough and we're not going to go any further. And now we're going to retaliate. Too many people in the West just have this arrogant belief that there's not going to be a line. There hasn't been so far, so there never will be. Ergo, we can do whatever we want. That is a foolish, arrogant, hubris-filled action that could have absolutely catastrophic consequences. And listen, it's important to say that the progress of the war hasn't made anything better for Ukraine. And in fact, make sure you're understanding this. It's not as though we had handcuffs on Ukraine and said you can't strike into Russia. They were doing this all the time. They've been striking Russian bases in the Crimea, Sevastopol. They've been striking Russian cities. They've been striking the civilian cities in the Donetsk. They've been striking Russian infrastructure. They struck those early warning radar systems that were like 1,800 kilometers away from the front line. They've been doing this with their own assets all the time. Nothing new on that. Hasn't changed the outcome of the war. Hasn't affected anything. Let me explain to you. Now, and let me explain to our devoted colleagues in the Pentagon and the White House and the State Department. I'm sure many of them are watching. If you think that an American bomb striking a target in Ukraine is going to do something that a Ukrainian bomb striking a target in Russia will make a difference, it ain't going to. And that's obviously, when I say it like that, it sounds absurd, but that's the reality of it. We're trying to make the difference that using an American weapon will have some different effect than the many Ukrainian weapons that are already being used. Self-evidently, that's not true. Now, the cynical side of me believes that actually this is probably just the Ukrainian side wanting to use American weapons to strike Russian territory in the hopes of spawning a reaction from the Kremlin, in the hopes of crossing a Putin red line so that he strikes more and then prompts another bigger response and entry into the war from the American side. I think that there's probably a better than even chance that that's why they're pushing so hard for this, because they see that the weapons that they have fired in there have had no material effect on the war whatsoever. That's just the truth of it. Now moving on to something that's a lot less pleasant for me as an American and somebody who served more than 20 years of time in the service, fought in 4 combat deployments, joined our nation's armed forces because I was very proud to be an American. I wanted to do good. I wanted to defend our country. And I always liked a lot of the things that we've done in the past to help other nations, even at our own cost sometimes. A lot of that stuff, decades worth, many decades worth, better part of a century, to be frank, since World War II, we are self-destructing and destroying it with our own hands, as Ambassador Chaz Freeman says here.
What separates Israel, the United States, and other democracies is our respect for international law and, as appropriate, the laws of war. We know that Israel will take all of the precautions that it can, just as we would. And again, that's what separates us from Hamas.
How can Mr. Blinken believe that, if he does? Or how can he say it with a straight face? We have seen a progression during the last 8 months in credibility collapse. Israel has zero credibility now. The minute their spokespeople open their mouth, everybody dismisses it as lies and nobody believes it. And we're doing the same thing to ourselves. We have great credibility to deploy lethal force. We have close to zero credibility of keeping our word, adhering to the principles we proclaim. We have something that Mr. Blinken touts, rules-based order, where we make the rules or don't, and we decide to whom they should apply or not, and we decide whether we'll follow them or not, and mostly we don't follow them. This is the definition of tyranny.
Now, since that episode came out, new information came out. I believe it was just yesterday or the day before, that the Pentagon has been discovered was taking part in a clandestine operation in the Philippines. If you could throw that first one up there, that the Pentagon launched a secret anti-vax campaign to discredit China during the COVID pandemic. And according to that report, basically what the U.S. was doing, what the Pentagon was doing, was creating thousands of fake accounts, lots of bots and whatever to go into the Philippines to undermine the vaccination that the Chinese had developed for COVID-19 and had given to a lot of Filipinos, so that it would discredit it. And it was basically an anti-vaxxer movement was started in the Philippines by our efforts there. And according to this report, there's a lot of evidence that many Filipinos died because they didn't take the vaccine, which by all accounts was actually fairly accurate and fairly effective, but we undermined it for the purpose of undermining China. Now, what that actually does, and if that sounds familiar, it ought to, because categorically, fundamentally, that's similar to what the Russians did to us that we had so much problems with. And I think it was the 2016 election. You know, there was these bot farms you may have heard about to where Russian people had created a lot of fake accounts to try to sway the American public into voting one way or another in the election. And we said, oh, there was definite election interference. And we talked about how bad it was and all this. And then we do the same thing. We do the same thing. And here's the problem. Now, once this report came out, instead of denying it or, you know, showing contrition and saying, oh, I'm really sorry, we shouldn't have done that, the Pentagon does this. Yeah, no, we're good with it. We stand by it. We're not even embarrassed about it. So get this straight. The United States military, the Pentagon, is saying we were conducting a secret anti-vax campaign to discredit Chinese medical supplies because we were mad at them because we didn't like the fact that they were trying to blame us for the start of COVID-19. And so we lied. We pretended to be Filipino. We pretended to have all these people that were, you know, domestic in Philippines. We just made it all up. We did the same thing the Russian did. And now we're like, oh, that's different though. That's cool because it's us. And since we write the rules-based order, we get to decide what is the rule that needs to be followed and what is the rule that can be broken with impunity. And look, that works for us because we have the power. We can just do it. And have you even heard about this? I bet not many of you have. And so it just didn't make any much of a ripple in the news in America because it's like, okay, yeah, whatever, moving on. If people even gave it that much thought. It has become so commonplace for us to lie and have a double standard. It just doesn't even register on the radar. But folks, let me guarantee you, it does register outside of America. And when we say we want to influence like the global South or the African continent or large swaths of Asia, or if we want to influence our friendly populations in Western Europe or anywhere in Europe, or if we want to influence our adversaries to compel them to take action that we want, like with the Uyghurs in China, for example, and saying the way you're treating the Uyghurs is bad. We want you to moderate it. We want you to give more freedom to them. If we want to have any possibility of letting our words influence the actions of other people, we have to have credibility. We have to have trust. People have to believe that what we say is true, that we don't tell somebody not to do something and then use the exact same techniques against an adversary that we don't like. And then not even shy about it. Because what that does is it gets us ridicule. It gets us contempt, both among our friends and our adversaries. Our adversaries now they just laugh at you when you try to convince them and try to shame them into something. They literally laugh in your face and now with more impunity continue to do it. Ergo, the Uyghurs are going to have more trouble, not less. When we try to use our influence and our words to try to moderate the behavior of others, it just gets laughed in our face and it falls completely impotent on the floor. And in a worst case scenario, it causes people to not even believe us when we're telling the truth because they can't determine the truth from the fiction anymore. And so nothing that we say is true, even when sometimes it may help somebody. And then it continues to harm our effects because in a worst case scenario that people could lose complete respect for us as well. And then lots of bad things become possible thereafter. It's not minor. It's not insignificant, folks. Our credibility as a nation is profoundly important. And Ambassador Freeman is right. We are literally trashing it by the day, and it damn well better stop soon. Okay, the next one here is we had John Mearsheimer on the show this week. Instead of talking about something he had said previously, this time he was on and he was talking about one of the ways America is playing with fire. American pundits, so-called experts, and retired generals, they keep saying, hey, Putin is bluffing. He's not going to escalate. He's not going to use his weapons against us. He doesn't have any red lines. So we should just not even worry about that.
He may be bluffing, but how do they know? Have they been inside his head lately? Even if they have been able to get inside his brain and figure out what he's thinking today, they know what he's going to be thinking in 2 or 3 months if all of a sudden we escalate this crisis and put him in a position where he has to think about what is or isn't a red line. And do they know what he's going to think when that day comes? The answer is no. What these people are doing is they're playing with fire. And these are assertions that involve possibility of a nuclear war. You want to remember that the Russians have made it unequivocally clear that what is going on in Ukraine is now an existential threat to them. They believe their survival is at stake.
I think we can all agree that an escalation of this conflict to really become potentially World War III, to become the U.S. versus Russia, which Putin already thinks it is. Putin already thinks it is.
So you can see there that John was warning about, we are playing with fire when we keep thinking there are no red lines. And then you have John Kirby there, and Gary kind of emphasized that toward the end there. Putin already thinks he's in a war with us. He's continuing to act like it. He's taking actions that are preparing his country to face a large war if he needs to include reinforcing his nuclear doctrine, which calls for the use of tactical nuclear weapons if he feels his territorial integrity has been threatened. And unless anybody has missed it, and again, you don't have to agree with this, but Putin annexed 4 provinces of Ukraine earlier in this war. In his view, and in the pundits and Russian media talk about this all the time, that is viewed as Russian territory today, not just what existed prior to 2014, but what exists right now in his mind. That's crucial that we understand the distinction between that. Even though virtually nobody else in the world has acknowledged Russia's annexation over those territories, he does. So when he's telling you that his military doctrine says if our territorial integrity is threatened, we'll use nuclear weapons, that means the Donbass. That means the areas where they have annexed. That means the Crimea. So even if somehow magically 5 years from now that the Western side had somehow enabled the Ukraine side to pose a genuine tactical threat to the Russian forces and was allowed them to unseat and get the Russians out, you're almost certainly going to be spawned into a nuclear war. Get the significance of what I'm saying right there. We are in a position to where we're kind of in no man's land here in the middle. If we don't take action, Ukraine's going to lose conventionally. They would have already lost if it hadn't been for the massive support we've already given them. They may lose anyway, even with the continued support because of the personnel. I keep telling you the number one issue is manpower. Ukraine doesn't have it. Russia does. And Russia has a bunch of other stuff. But almost those one category alone in a war of attrition, it's going to eventually go the way the side that has the most troops. It's just how it works in centuries of warfare. Nothing new about this. But if we don't reach a negotiated settlement, more on that later in the show here, Ukraine will lose. If we go and somehow make it so that they push Russia back, whether it's by putting in Western troops or volunteers, or just try to wait Russia out for 2 or 3 more years while you're building up combat power and then you succeed, if you move the pendulum back the other direction, you've got nuclear war. In other words, you will lose if you keep with the status quo eventually. You will lose if you change the status quo to the positive side for Ukraine, because then it'll be nuclear weapons. We are in a no-win situation. There is no scenario, get this, there is no scenario whereby the West can succeed in any definition on the battlefield. One way or the other, we're going to fail, either catastrophically or embarrassingly. If it's only a tactical loss on the conventional battlefield, it's an embarrassment, but our security is still insured because the borders there on the eastern flank of NATO are still more powerful than Russia, even with all this. Even as much as they've improved, they still can't take on a 32-member alliance. Is self-evident from any honest evaluation of the battlefield. So what we need to do is to stop being stupid, to start recognizing we are playing with fire, and take action to bring this to a negotiated end and start the rebuilding process for the Ukrainian people who are still alive. Next one here, we want to move overseas to a different part now, to China. We had Cyrus Jensen, a China expert, who was live on the show from China, and he had this to say about the possibility of war with China.
I think the chances of war with China, that ball is in the United States court. It really depends on what we want to do. If we recognize the one China policy, we move away from all of these verbal gaffes from the president. We really respect the one China policy that has guided our relationship for the past 50 years. And we also adhere to the policy that we're going to call out both sides if there's any type of unilateral shift away from that. And if we stay committed to that, I think we're going to be good. I really think that the chances of us going to war are actually much lower than it appears. And that also comes from having visited Taiwan many times before. And what's interesting? You go to Taiwan, you talk to local Taiwanese people, they're not worried. They're doing their normal life. They love life. It's a great place. Every day goes by and it's like, hey, we've been living in for 40, 50 years of everybody telling us that China's going to invade at any second. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Let's just kind of keep going on with our day.
Okay, couple things that are important to point out there, especially for the American audience here. You're told all the time, and have been for years, that war with China is just around the corner, and we better beef up our security arrangements in the sea with AUKUS, with several other kinds of bilateral arrangements. We've increased the number of bases that we have there. We're trying to get billions and billions additional dollars on top of the normal defense budget to build up the Indo-Pacific area. You've seen admiral after admiral over the last several years variously say that China will be ready to invade by, one said 2025, another says 2027. We had, I think earlier in this week, and maybe even in that show, we showed somebody who said 2028. All of this warning is just like war is coming, as though it's 1938 in Europe. By the way, it's always 1938 to the warmongers and these people who love war. It's always 1938. There's always somebody. It's either Putin or Xi Jinping or the Ayatollah or the leader, the Kim Jong-un in North Korea. There's always somebody that's the next Hitler, always. And they're saying the same thing now. All of these things I just mentioned are all similar to that, in that they're trying to scare you into thinking, oh my God, the next Hitler is about ready to roll. And the only thing that's going to stand up to him is if we build up the military here. That's just absurd. It's stupid. It's counterfactual. If you actually take the emotion out of it and look at the fundamentals and the realities on the ground, let's look at China. Are they an expansionist power that wants to conquer territory and dominate a region or the world? What have they shown in their history? And I'm talking thousands of years of Chinese history. They have had internal wars. They have had a lot of wars between this dynamism and that dynamism, and this kingdom and the other one, whatever. A lot of internal stuff. 1949, the Civil War that was there, which kind of culminated in 1949, started long before that, even before the Second World War, in between the communists and the nationalists at the time, which took a long, long time, huge casualties on both sides in there, and ended up with the nationalists being driven to what was called Formosa at the time. Now it's called Taiwan. So since that time, since 1949, how many wars has China started? How much conquest have they done? Look, they are a big power. Lots of countries around there. They had a border skirmish with the Soviet Union. They had a border skirmish with, I believe it was Vietnam and maybe Cambodia. I can't recall. But they're very short, very brief, and definitely some border skirmishes with India. All of these things are very short, have very narrow tactical requirements, and then they come back. And that's it. They've never, launched into an invasion. They've never taken control of any of these countries. Not one. Not one. I don't need to go through the list of how many countries America has attacked since 1949. We'll let your mind run with that one because you understand that. So if you're saying who is the big threat here, You can't say that the side that has had 3 or 4 border skirmishes and that's it in the entire region, when it has this massive number of troops and has never done it, why do we think that now then they're going to do it here and only us can stop it? And then you have to look at another thing. Why would China do it? Why would China want to conquer it? And they do say they have very clearly and consistently since 1949 said they would use force, that they would invade Taiwan if and only if they declare independence. They said their number one goal, and they have for the better part of 70 plus years, folks. They said they want a peaceful reunion. They have never gone back on that word. They have always been good to it, that they have sought a peaceful reunification, and that's still what they want. So if we want to spawn a war, what we'll do is we'll keep giving signals to the Taiwanese side that they should go independent. And we'll support those in Taiwan who does say, and we'll continue to give them more and more and more weapons. And then we'll show China by building up military bases around China. And we're doing that. A lot of Americans aren't even aware of it. But like Palau, we've expanded some areas on Japan. We're expanding nuclear technology cooperation with Australia. And of course, we got bases in South Korea, several other things in the Philippines, all kinds of areas where we're trying to poke China with military. And you have our admirals saying that we think war is coming. Well, now, what do you think they're going to do? What do you think any major power that's rising especially is going to do? They're going to take the threat seriously. And so they are beefing up their military. They are doing these exercises like they did when the Taiwanese president was just elected and gave his inauguration speech a week or two ago. And they had what they call punishment of basically demonstrating how they would surround the island and either have a blockade or launch an invasion. They could have done either with the exercises that they had done there. And they've been showing that their air power, their missile power, their drone capacity, their air power, rotary winged insertions. They have all kinds of capabilities that I personally don't think they need to wait till 2025. I think they already have it. If there was some need right now, they almost certainly could launch and eventually succeed right now. So if you're talking about capability, don't worry about looking to 2027 or 2028. It's like this week, folks. They have that capacity right now. There will be no war. I'll categorically say this, so long as we don't provoke one. That's the truth. If we don't provoke a war, if we don't give China reason to go in there, they're not going to, because they have nothing to gain from it. They want to have a peaceful reunification with Taiwan. Taiwan doesn't want to go back to China, so they are against that. But as long as the status quo remains, there's not going to be a war. China has shown for the better part of a century they're willing to go with the status quo. As long as economic things keep flowing, trade between the two sides keeps going on, travel is continuing to go on, and there's no insertion from the West to try and separate the two. As long as we don't do that, they have clearly shown that they are willing to remain patient and continue talking, continue doing business. China realizes that if they try this, they are taking enormous, huge risk militarily. And they know that they're taking enormous risk economically, because the global economy will be shattered no matter how this comes. Even if we stay out, it's going to be shattered for various reasons. China knows this, and they knows that their economy is very, very vulnerable to a global economic setback. So they realize that there are huge, huge risks for them. And unless they see huge potential benefit, they're not going to make that calculation, as they have shown since I've been alive. And there's no reason to think that they're going to do it differently. So if you want to, quote, deter China from going to war, the best way we can do that at the lowest cost is just stay out of the politics and keep with the one China principle that we agreed to in the 70s, which is there is one governing body in China, and then we'll leave it up to them to figure out who it is, whether it's the one in Taiwan, as Cyrus told us about in that episode. Go back and watch that if you want more explanation of that, or the one in Beijing. Not my deal, not my problem. Y'all figure that out. If y'all come to some kind of mutual agreement, terrific. We're good with all of that. If China were to someday invade Taiwan, there are things that we could do, especially if we stay to the one China policy and the worst happens. There are things we can do. The worst is to engage militarily. This is not going to be like a Russia-Ukraine situation, folks, because we can't get stuff flowing back and forth. We don't have a land border with Taiwan like we do with Ukraine. So it would be a radically different thing, and we will have to stay out of that war at all costs, because it could either all too easily go nuclear, or it could stay conventional and destroy and gut half of our Pacific fleets, Air Force and naval fleets. You want to talk about something catastrophic for our long-term interest, knocking us from the perch of the world's biggest superpower, possibly and probably permanently. Let us do that. That's what we would risk by having war with China over Taiwan. We must never, under any circumstances, do that. If America itself is not threatened or attacked by China, we must not go to war with China. That's the only way. And I do agree that we should have a strong military, so that if China ever did attack us, like an unprovoked Pearl Harbor type attack, that we need to have a powerful ability to respond and defend our homeland. Absolutely unequivocal on that. But to start a war or to court one is suicidal, and we should never do it. Okay, moving on to some new stuff here. We had Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Brown, was talking about some of the challenges of using F-16s for Ukraine. He had there's some issues going on right now to where, you've been talking about the F-16s literally for over a year. Now apparently it's getting close to coming on board, where they're actually going to start showing up on the battlefield. General Brown talked about some challenges.
Not only do we help provide training for their pilots, there's other countries that are also supporting the training as well. So there is capacity for training, both in the United States, but also with some of the partners as part of that capability coalition. And so we'll continue to work with them, but it's not just the pilots you have to have, and having not only flown the F-16, but understanding maintenance is also a key part of that, and training the maintainers. And we're working diligently to make sure that the Ukrainians have what they need, and the goal is to get them those F-16s this summer.
Okay, that's quite an understatement of saying, there's some issues with maintenance and training, and there's a lot of other things you didn't say, like the airfields. I don't know if you're aware, but F-16 isn't like MiG-29 or some of the Su-27s that Ukraine has in its air fleet, to where it can just land on whatever runway. It's got to be a specific runway. They're very sensitive. The runway has to be very specific, strength, length, all these kinds of things. Russia knows that. So they've actually already bombed a couple of times the airfields where the F-16s are supposed to go. Now there's talk about, well, from the Ukraine side, maybe we need to keep those F-16s on like Polish soil and NATO territory and some of the other bordering countries on there, and then just use them, to fly into here. Well, what do you think Russia's going to say about that? They already have. They said any F-16 that flies from any neighboring country airfield becomes a legitimate target. If it leaves from Polish, from Romania, etc., and then flies a combat mission in the war zone, it becomes a legitimate military target, which they may well take out. They said they reserve the right to do that. Again, we don't know for sure where the red line is, but it seems hard to me to imagine that Russia is just going to allow that kind of thing, because that would be a precedent setter that would just expand probably exponentially if the West saw that they could do that, and there would be no response. So I bet that there would be some response. But here's a bigger issue. F-16s are the latest thing that is going to be a game changer, because that's an American bird, right? And we know how great the American Air Force is. So by putting those planes in the air, that they're going to have the same results that the U.S. has. They're not going to. Russian air defense capabilities can knock that bird down just as well as it can knock down other aircraft, other modern aircraft. I mean, Russia has some pretty strong air defense capabilities. It's not foolproof by any stretch. It's not like an Iron Dome that can literally shoot down anything. It's pretty good. It's not foolproof, but I assure you, it could knock down an F-16 just like it can and has knocked down any other aircraft that's flown against it in this war so far. So if we think that the F-16 is going to make a difference, especially with just a handful, it's just not going to. Again, look at the balance right now. Russia has, according to the previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, he said in 2020, late 2022, I think it was, that Russia had 1,000 fourth and fifth generation fighters and bombers, and Ukraine had about 100. So even if you add a full squadron, 2 squadrons, 3 squadrons of F-16s, You're just going to add another 100 to now maybe it'll be 100 to maybe now it's 900 because Russia has lost a lot of planes as well. But so has Ukraine. So it's not even going to be 100. It's going to be some number less than that. But you still see maybe it's 900 to 100 still. So Russia with 1,000 fourth and fifth gen fighters has not brought the Ukraine side to the knees with their dilapidated and so many holes like a sieve air defense systems. Russia's is much better than that. So upon what rationale and logic does any logically thinking military expert contend that having a fraction of the number of aircraft than the Russians have is going to be materially different and change the war? It's just not going to. It's going to make good PR as it already has. It's going to make good videos because Ukraine side's really good at that. They're really good at making good PR videos. And they'll make some great stuff. They'll have music with it. They'll have some Hollywood style motions with the cameras and close-ups and all this kind of stuff like they've had. Well, we've shown several of them. It's not going to make any difference on the battlefield, folks. Not going to do anything at all. So the longer we keep going down with this fantasy of thinking that things are going to go the way we want, the more we're fooling ourselves. Okay, moving on to the next one here. We had Secretary Austin saying that he likes to look at things from a certain equation. So, I'll just let him speak for himself.
The Ukrainians have done a lot to fortify their defensive positions, and they're making good use of the weapons and munitions that they're being provided. And more of that will continue to flow in. And so, in my view, they'll get stronger as time progresses. They're also doing things to mobilize more people and train more people. And so the combination of those things, I think, will have a pretty substantial effect on the battlefield, but it will take some time to kind of play out. But the good news is that we have the means to continue to provide security assistance, and you'll see it continue to flow in a very meaningful way.
Okay, this is just more fiction from Austin. This was a couple of days ago to where he was talking about after the United States has signed this so-called long-term agreement with Ukraine, that now it's, that we had Zelensky, we've shown you earlier where he said, it's a 10-year agreement. And now then in relation, also part of what he was referring to there was the $61 billion package that was passed a month or so ago. Now it's starting to make a difference. Here's the problem. He's only looking at half of the equation because there's two sides of the equation, whether you like it or not. There's the Ukraine side and all of its allies, and there's the Russian side and all of its allies. While the Ukraine side has indeed, some of the $61 billion has increased especially the amount of artillery that's gone to the front lines. It has helped in several other categories as well. Absolutely it has. It's been balanced on the other side. Russia is also continuing to increase its capacity, its domestic capacity, which dwarfs anything the entire cumulative West is doing in terms of artillery preparation. They're getting more ammunition from North Korea and Iran in drones and missiles that the West and artillery shells more than the West is delivering. So Russia, the Russian allies are producing more and giving more to them, and the Russians are producing more by orders of magnitude more than the Ukrainians are. So you see that whatever Austin is talking about, incremental changes and improvements on the Ukraine side, he's saying, this is going to somehow change the dynamics. He's acting as though the Russian side is static, as though they're just sitting there in a two-dimensional caricature. And as long as we can keep building this side up, then eventually we'll go over this side and they'll be able to do it. But it's not two-dimensional. It's not static. It's continuing on. And this is the kind of leadership that we have. Instead of being honest with you when he's telling stuff like this, instead of being honest with himself, instead of being honest with the president of the United States and the other Western leaders and the Ukrainian leadership and telling them, folks, math don't lie. I mean, the numbers are what they are. Fundamentals of combat don't lie. Historical fundamentals that lead to combat power for a national and how it impacts on the tactical battlefield don't lie. Everything is materially against the Ukraine side. Of course, I've mentioned before the manpower issue, which is the number one issue, but all the other issues also go against it. So there's no path to success here. There's no improvement, what he's talking about, even materially so, because the full equation must be considered, whether you want it to or not. And if you just pretend it's not, you're going to get hit in the side of the head in a bad way one of these days when something happens because you only looked at half the equation. But that's the state of play in our country today and with our leadership. One of the other fundamental things I do want to assess here, which was from a show we did, I think it might have been yesterday, even I haven't seen the date. I can't remember. There's a lot of these we do here. But one of the enduring fundamentals that we've seen from the beginning of the war, all the way back to the beginning, and again, it was mentioned here recently, is this whole conflating between Putin and Hitler. Like I said earlier, it's always 1938, right? And now then you have every bad guy is always Hitler, which I talked about earlier. Zelensky is nothing if not consistent. He's been calling Putin Hitler from the beginning. That's why he always says he's going to come rolling across. If we take it, almost certainly in the coming 2 or 3 days, you're going to see lots of headlines that this is just like Hitler in Czechoslovakia. Give us Czechoslovakia and you'll have peace. And then, of course, he rolled over everybody. So they're saying it's the same thing here. Putin is going to say, give us these territories here and then we're going to have peace. And they'll say, no, it's just like Munich. Don't do it. But here's the thing. There is a radical difference between the two. Hitler, when he did the Sudetenland and then he went into take Czechoslovakia, etc., he didn't have to take it by military means, and he had his entire military armed force basically ready to go, and it was at that time untested because that was even before Poland. Now then, Russia has been damaged a lot by 2.5 years of war, and they have shown that they have a military that has a size enough eventually to conquer half of Ukraine, and that's it. Hitler actually had a massive army, air force, and navy that they had a chance to take and did the entire continent of Europe. Putin does not have that capacity. Another massive, massive difference. Understand this. Before you see these headlines, know this, because they won't tell you this. Unlike 1938, both sides have nuclear weapons now. So the idea that Russia is going to roll into Western Europe is just as foolish and suicidal as if NATO countries trying to roll into Russia, because either one of those is going to trigger a nuclear response from the other. And both sides are open about saying so. So you know ahead of time how to cut the knees out of that crappy argument. So that's the reality. There's not a whole lot I really need to add to that, but I will add one additional thing that I didn't cover in there. And that is, that's not to say that the future couldn't change. What I described there was conditions as they exist right now. Here's the good news. If things start to change, you will know about it and years in advance. And let me tell you how. As I pointed out there, Hitler had this massive army, Air Force, Navy, etc., from which to make an incursion. So it was a legitimate threat. Right now, Russia doesn't have it. But if you see that Russia goes on a full mobilization, and now then they get 5, 6, 7, 8 million men under arms, and they go on a multi-year process to just crank out armored vehicles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, howitzers, other kinds of ammunition carriers, etc., in the tens of thousands. If you see them go on this massive shipbuilding process, and this, of course, this will take 3, 5, 7 longer years. But if you see them go on these big things, then you have legitimate reason to be concerned. And then maybe you do want to start building up your militaries. Then you have some worries that maybe he could be a Hitler-like because he has the capacity, sort of. Because the one thing that won't change from what I just described there is the nuclear balance on either side. Both sides are prohibited from doing that, which is why in my mind, there is virtually no chance that Russia would do that. They would go on such a buildup over an extended period of time because they know that to cross that border almost immediately before the first battalion is fully crossed some border, the likelihood of a nuclear weapon coming across is just too high. And there's no value in that. But Putin has no territorial, just maniacal desires like Hitler did. He's never shown it. He's been in power for 20-something years, and he's never done it. So I don't know why you think he's suddenly become fundamentally different. So he's shown everything that he cares about, his national security, his national borders. So there's every reason to believe that's going to continue on. If something happens because people change and you see those signs starting to develop, then we can have a different conversation. And we can have a different category. And if I were in charge, then I would do something different. But if I were in charge now or in the future with the current conditions, then I would do everything in my power to say, hey, we're going to have to bring this deal to a close here. We're going to have to bring the war to a close, and we're going to have to start improving relations with Russia. Because Russia lives where they live. Western Europeans live where they live, and our allies are who they are, and they're going to continue to be that way, and our friends. So we have an incentive and a motivation to get this deal off the table. We've got to stop thinking beyond the end of our nose, which we don't do very well. We have to start thinking strategically and even medium term, for crying out loud. This war is going to be over at some point by one means or another. God help us if it goes nuclear, but if it doesn't go nuclear, it'll end at some point. And guess what, folks? There's going to have to be relations between Russia and the United States. And listen, Putin even addressed that himself. So there's reason for moving in this direction from Putin himself. Instead of giving you indications that he's actually another Hitler, he's actually giving you indications that he's Putin, he's his own guy, and that there is reason to try to worry about having cooperation organizations with him. Here's what he said yesterday.
If Europe wants to remain an independent and cultural and civilizational centers of international gravity, it needs to maintain a good relationship with Russia. And most importantly, we are ready for that.
So he's ready for that. Now, remember, Putin has been saying since 2014, since June 2021, December 2021, April 2022, several times in 2023, and again in the interview he did in February of this year with Tucker Carlson, and what he said a couple of days ago. He is interested in a negotiated settlement. We had a whole show on this yesterday. Please go back and look on our webpage there, especially on the live tab, and you'll see that, where we talk a lot about this peace proposal that Russia did. And as I won't rehash that whole thing, but the bottom line of it is there is a shot to actually have a negotiated settlement to end the war. Putin desires it, and he laid it out, what he's willing to give and what he's not willing to do. And it's bad. It's a bad deal for the Ukraine side. No two ways about it. But it's better than the alternative, which he also implied. If we don't take this one, then the next one is probably going to be surrender terms, because he's going to continue to take militarily what he's trying to get through negotiations right now. But he wants this war to be over and is willing to negotiate. He has been all the way through, and it just grieves me to say, if we had just taken the deal that was offered in April of 2022, hundreds of thousands potentially of Ukrainian people could still be alive right now. Kiev would still be in charge of the vast majority of their country. And the war would have been over, and the risk of escalation, all that would be done. And instead we are where we are here. So it doesn't matter what we should have done then. It only matters what we're going to do now. And we have a path forward. We have a possibility that we can end the war and start the long, painful process of getting back together and living together on the same planet, on the same continent. That's what it's really about. That's what's at stake here. The war is going to be over, folks. Let's start the process right now of getting past this so that we can live in peace and don't constantly have this threat of nuclear war hanging over our heads again. Let's don't go back to a Cold War type situation where you have possibilities of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis constantly going up and down. It's stupid. It doesn't have any help for any of us, and it's time to stop that. And that's the primary thing we wanted to give you here. That's the gist of You Intel Brief. But there is one more thing that I consider myself somewhat of an expert on body language. And, we've shown a lot of comments over the time. You've seen some confident Putins. You've seen some confident Jens Stoltenbergs. Macron is coming up there sometimes, and he gives this, dashing view where he's like the guy who's really in charge. And then there are other times where there's different kind of body languages, and we've had a couple of those examples here lately. This is Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the G7, and if you're not aware, there's been some challenges between her and Macron, and they've had a little bit of angst. But watch as Macron was walking down the line, shaking hands with heads of state. So he's going, and he had all these people say, "Oh, that's so nice." Now look at Meloni right there. Look at her eyes. It's like darts are coming out. But oh man, that one right there. Oh, that was the worst. And she's like, "Yeah, oh, it looks like I'm gonna get sick." We need to zoom in there, slow motion. Look at these eyes, right there. No, right there. Oh, she's like, "Yeah." Man, if there were daggers coming out, that body language is like, yeah, don't touch me, get away from me. Looked more like almost a little bit like as if it was a jilted lover almost, or they had, had some lover spat behind the scenes, and now he had to come up and pretend everything was good. And well, it looks like they have some issues there, but that was interesting. Next, we have the head of the NATO alliance, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Now, as I just mentioned, we've shown him on here many times where he was cutting also a dashing figure and a lot of confidence. He was on yesterday and was asking an odd question. Now, I'm not even going to put the actual words he's spoken in here, but just watch his body language here. And I won't take credit for this one. This one's Gary came up with this one. He calls it the Stoltenberg jig, I think. So watch him. He's very nervous. What he's talking about here, he's trying to say something that he knows is just a bunch of nonsense, and he's trying to find a good way out of it. And, well, just watch for yourself. So he's like, yeah, the Stoltenberg jig, I think Gary was calling this, and he's just kind of hopping around, and he's just jumping here. He's got his arms folded. He's just not being very confident, but it's just the Stoltenberg jig. Yeah, there it was. It's just like, yeah. Anyway, you got to have some fun every now and then, and that's the kind of what we had here. But listen, folks, a lot of serious things going on in the world right now, and we're very grateful for you. Very, very sincerely, I say this because we try to give you the truth of the situation. We're not pro right or pro left or pro anything else other than pro the truth. We want to give you the real situation, the genuine analysis, whether that's something that's good for the United States, bad for Russia, good for Russia, bad for the United States. It doesn't matter how you can interpret it however you want to, but it's critical that you know the full truth, that you see what's really happening on the ground on both sides of the equation. You've got to have that. If anybody's ever going to make a good decision, if you want to be an informed citizen to even know what you should and shouldn't support according to your own interpretation, according to your own values, you've got to know what's really going on. And we do our best to provide that for you here. And we're going to continue to do it. And we're very grateful for you coming on. We're very grateful when you hit that like and subscribe button and the notify button. And now then the join feature. We've got a new membership that we're offering. And we want you guys to have an opportunity to get even more. But we want you to share this with as many people as possible because we're trying to build the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Army of people who care about the truth and then want to share it out there so that people get more than just, sharing memes or sharing, some slanted view from the right or the left or this or that, whatever. We want to be the part of that crew that says this is the truth, and we want that honesty out there. We want integrity to, again, reign. And one of the best ways we can do that, folks, is to grow our numbers so that the truth gets out there and these people can't hide behind partial truths or going half the equation. That's what you're doing here. You're part of this. We are all in this together. And you play a part in this. And the faster we can grow, the bigger we can get, the more the truth gets out there and make some of these people uncomfortable of telling lies, of doing things that make no sense because they can't hide behind a partial truth anymore. Or if they tell a lie, they can't hide behind it because we're going to expose it. You help in doing that. And if you keep spreading the word here, folks, one of these days we may get to a critical mass and people may start doing the right thing, whether they want to or not. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on and joining us today. We will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.